Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we dive deep into the world of PPC, specifically the advantages of self-managing PPC versus hiring a PPC agency versus hiring an in-house employee. Over the past few years, Ken and I have employed all three of these strategies and learned a lot from our experiences, which we hope to share with you today. Be sure to stay tuned for a strategy on how to find talented PPC managers. Ken, what's going on, man?
David, how are you? I'm excited to be on the podcast today. We're batch taping. This is another remote episode. Not in the studio, unfortunately. But yeah, we're here to deliver a lot of value and share with the listeners our experience. Many years of running PPC and hiring for PPC, and what's good, what's the bad, and kind of break it all down and share with everyone, and hopefully learn a lot. And so. Yeah, David, let's kick it off.
Absolutely. So to kind of set the stage, what is PPC? It's pay-per-click advertising. It is a very important part and component of selling on Amazon. And so there's a typical path that I've observed with myself, with you, Ken, and a lot of our friends that are in this community as it relates to PPC. And that is everyone starts off self-managing. And they'll do this for a certain period of time. And then they'll kind of realize, oh my gosh, PPC is a mile deep and a mile wide. And I don't understand all of this. What do I do? A natural second step is to hire an agency, which we've done. And we're going to get into this. And some people stop there at hiring a PPC agency. However, some people, as their team grows, they may bring a PPC manager in-house. And so today we're going to go through all three of these strategies, share our experiences with them, and just share some positives and negatives that we've experienced. So, Ken, I laid out that path: self-managing, PPC agency, in-house. Is that how? Tell me about your PPC story.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that's probably accurate, or we're generalizing here, but yeah, it's pretty accurate. As you start out, and we're kind of like referring to like if you're starting out as an Amazon FBA entrepreneur, right? You start there first, and then kind of build on that. And as your company grows, as you're an entrepreneur, you wear 10 different hats, right? You're the marketing person, you're the finance person, you're the PPC person, you're everything. And as the company grows, you find your time where, you don't have it, there's no time left in the bucket. And so you have to start hiring out or partnering with agencies to take that off your plate. And one of those, probably one of the first moves is PPC. It's probably one of the most important things, unless you're really, really good at it, right? Like most entrepreneurs are like, that I know, that they're really, really good at like one or two things, maybe three, and then they're average at a bunch of other stuff. They can make it happen. And, unless you're a rock star in PPC and you really enjoy spending your time in there, you should offload that, whether it's an agency or whatever's a good fit for you. My personal journey. So I started selling on Amazon back in 2017, and I self-managed PPC for, I would say, the first 6 months. And then, at the time I knew nothing about PPC. My background, I was in engineering, network engineering, which is nothing about pay-per-click advertising or media buying. And so it was kind of a new space for me. I thought it was cool. I liked the concept of it, but I really knew nothing about it. So I had to learn and kind of figure it out on my own. And then as I learned and figured it out on my own, I'm like, all of these other things I'm trying to learn as well. And I'm like, PPC, it was not something at the time. It was kind of like, download these spreadsheets, do all, and David knows this, I'm not a spreadsheet guy. I'm not. And so like my spreadsheet on a 1 to 10, I'm about a 2 on spreadsheets. And so like, I'm like, oh, this is not good. And so I had found an agency, I had partnered with an agency about 6 months into my selling experience. And actually, before I partnered with an agency, I tried a software. And I think it was Selix at the time. And so I tried Selix for about 3 months, went in and got all the rules set up, got all the campaigns set up, and it was running and functioning, but I didn't feel comfortable. I'm like, what, like, I don't know what's happening here. Am I making money? Am I losing money? And so and the cost of that software was pretty expensive at the time. And so I found this agency. I was talking with some other entrepreneurs in the space, and I found this agency. And they're like, yeah, this agency, like, you need an agency that they're experts, and they can take that off your plate and run with that. You just pay them a fixed amount. They're going to scale your company. And I was like, okay, let's give this a shot. So hired this agency, and they did. They came in. They evaluated. At the time, I had 2 companies. They evaluated both companies, and they came in. And I would say within 6 months, I had doubled sales from just this PPC agency. So I really give them a ton of credit for coming in and seeing opportunity and scaling rapidly, which also put me in bind because now I've got to buy more inventory to ship more and do all that. But that created some other issues. But in terms of that, and so I stayed with this agency for, I think, over 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. They were, really, really good. The account manager that I had was awesome. Like this guy was so cool. And I think I just got lucky. I landed like their most talented account manager, right? And so this guy was a rock star. And the whole time I kind of got this sense of like, he's not spending a ton of time on my account, but he's doing enough to make it work and to make it go well. There was always these like things I would say, hey, can you do this next time, or can you do this next time? And it was about 50-50 if he would accomplish it or not. And so I kind of got this thing. I'm like, he's working on all these other accounts. But I'm doing so many other things. I didn't have time. And I'm just like, it's good enough, right? That 80-20 rule. And so it got to a point where it was happening more and more. And I'm like, you know what? I this account manager is getting more and more put on his plate, and his time is getting spread thin. He's making errors. He's missing things. And the account actually slipped a little bit. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Like I talked to the owner. I'm like, hey, and it fixed it for a little bit, but then like a few months later, it went back. And I'm like, this is definitely a problem. And so I parted ways with that agency after probably 2.5 years. And then I went back to self-managing, which was a step backwards, right? And so I think I went to, at the time, Helium 10 had just launched their like PPC software, and it was essentially free to use. And I'm like, I'm just going to save some money, throw this all in there, and and then manage it myself. And actually, at that time, I had started building a small team, so I had a couple of people that were working with me, and so I kind of offloaded that onto their plate. And so it was in-house with free software. And we did that for about 6 months, and it did not turn out well. And so I don't know if that's on me, if the software or what, but it didn't go well. It wasn't going as well. And I think I was very spoiled from when I hired that first agency, and the sales like doubled in like 6 months. I was like, man, I want to continue to do this. And I don't think this reality that you face. I think all products and everything have a peak, and I think I peaked there, and I got spoiled. So after about 6 months of kind of in-house with Helium 10, I think I blamed the software. And so then I switched. At the time, all the buzz was, hey, everybody's kind of switching to this AI software. And so then I switched over to, at the time, David, you and I were going through lots of, we were interviewing lots of, we were testing out lots of different software. So I boiled it down and picked Perpetua. So then we rolled everything onto Perpetua, and we ran that for, I think, 3 to 6 months, and it was going okay. But I didn't trust the AI. There was lots of things that it was doing behind the scenes that it's very graphical, and it's not like nuts and bolts. You can't dig in real deep, and you have to like set special rules if you want certain things to happen. It's very hands off. They want the AI engine to do all the heavy lifting, and they want you to have very minimal interactions, which I think that software is likely great for ad agencies to use, right, for all their account managers, but wasn't for us. And so we scaled up a little bit, and then went back to, at the time, our companies were growing rapidly, right? We're adding new businesses, we're growing. We're like, we can't do this in-house. Let's get an agency. Let's take this to the next level. Hired another agency, and used them for, I think 6 months. And then it was the same deal. You know, the account manager was excellent, came out of the gate doing really, really well. And then, you know, it just started slipping and he was missing things. He wasn't accomplishing things. You know, he shared with us, hey, I've got, you know, 17 other accounts or 12 other, whatever it was a lot. And at this point, it was like, at this point, I think we had 3 accounts under management with this agency. And it was like, we're paying this person 3 times the amount to manage these accounts. And we're getting one time the time, one, you know, we're only getting 1 account's worth of time. And so that was very frustrating. We dealt with that for a while and then made the decision, hey, you know, and this was a numbers game of, hey, let's move forward with this or bring this in house. And so at the time, we decided to bring it in house, and we'll cover that a little bit later. So that was kind of my, I don't know, sorry, 7-year journey or 6-year journey through PPC, all in a 5-minute span. So I'll kick it over to you, David, and you can share your your journey.
Absolutely. So in a lot of ways, my experiences overlapped with you. Early on, I think I was saying, you know, before we even went into business together, I was saying, Ken, who are you using for PPC? And I ended up hiring the same manager that you did. And I also used Celix. I think that probably was before we had met. And one quick story about this, you may have heard me say on this podcast before that no software will be your savior. And that my first experience with this was Celix. It was kind of touted as set it and forget it. And I did. I set up rules and I didn't look at my PPC all summer. And I got my books back and I'm like, oh my gosh, this has gone great. This is not a set it and forget it. Perhaps these rules are helpful in adjusting bids, but like it was at that point in time, it was not a good set it and forget it. So that is when I went to agency number 1. A lot of the same experiences that you covered. You know, with our most recent, or I guess our last agency, it's a funny story now, but it wasn't funny at the time. So we had what seems to happen a lot of times on PPC is you'll be at break even. It's the free markets at work, right? The keywords cost a certain amount, and you know there's only so many keywords that are used to describe a product, and you find yourself a lot of times breaking even. Which, again, I am in the business of making net income, and so at least that's what I believe my goal is. So anyway, we had a very firm talk with our manager. And, you know, growing up in my family, whenever somebody had a very serious, stern conversation, it was referred to as a come to Jesus talk. I don't know why we called it that. That was just what it was called. And so when we had this very firm conversation, I referred to it as our come to Jesus conversation. Our account manager was Muslim. And Ken pointed this out to me, and I felt horrible. I didn't mean to be offensive at all. But that was kind of like conversation number 1. I am unhappy with how account management is going. We need to make a change. As time went on, we weren't seeing the results that we wanted. And we ended up getting on a conference call with our manager and the owner of this agency. And, you know, for probably a half hour, we stated our issues and some of the things that we weren't happy with, thinking that these things would be addressed. 20 minutes after that meeting, we get an email saying, we no longer want you as a customer. You're essentially fired as a customer. And, you know, we talk about the 80-20 rule a lot, and you hear that, you know, 20% of your customers. So we've all heard the 80-20 principle, and what goes along with that is 20% of your customers are going to take up 80% of your time. And in this instance, we were one of those customers that was a pain to deal with. And so I have no gripes with this particular agency. They made a business decision, and that was to get rid of us as clients. And so that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and we decided to do something different, go away from the agency route, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Um, so anyway, that was my abbreviated journey through PPC. So anyway, let's talk about just a quick discussion on self management, because you may be hearing this and say, well, why would I ever self manage? Why wouldn't I just skip to the front of the line and go with an agency? And so, Ken, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think it's this is kind of a business case on and it's specific to every business. And so, and like we talked about earlier, if you are good with PPC, if you have a background in like maybe Excel sheets or media buying or whatever, and you're good at this, then you might choose a different decision than someone else who, say they're coming in from a different career field that they have no idea what this is. You really have to take this with your experience and then figure out what's kind of the best for you. And also, it doesn't hurt to try. That's the other thing too, is like you can't be afraid to try something new. Give it 6 months, and then if it doesn't work, pivot back over and try something else. And so don't ever feel like you're locked in. Most agencies don't have a long-term contract. You can test them and then stop and then go in-house. But I would say, like, if you're specifically on the self-management piece, if you're going to choose to take in-house with self-management, then you really have to have a good understanding of PPC and a foundation, whether it's take a course, whether it's experience to learn on your own. But you need to know like some of the terms, ACOS, TACOS, ROAS. You need to know these. You need to know kind of mid-level PPC, like what kind of ad types are out there, where's the placements, what's cheap right now, what's working, what's not. You just have to. So you need to take more time and have more experience. And the other piece is also it depends what kind of business you have. David, some of our businesses have 10 SKUs, some of them have 500, and so that also plays it factors into whether you're going to offload something or do it in house. If it's, and also an agency, there's agencies that charge for more for more SKUs and things like that, and so there's a lot going on there. But I would just say sit down, do pros and cons, and list out everything for your business, and then figure out if that's if it's a pro or con. You want to keep it in house? Do you want to farm it out? So, what are your thoughts, David?
So here's my plug for self-managing, at least early on. And I'm going to use a baseball analogy. If someone were to say, I want to go to the major leagues, what do I need to do? My response would be, you need to know how to throw. You need to know how to catch. You need to know how to hit. Like those are the core functions of a baseball player. You need to know how to do those. I would say in this business, if you are viewing it more than a side hustle, like this is something you want to be a professional at, you want to fire the man and be a professional at this. In this business, I would say, to go along with this analogy, you need to know PPC, you need to know product development, and you need to know team building. Those would be my three for catch, hit, and throw. And so I think while my performance early on was not great, uh, I learned a lot. You kind of learn through the school of hard knocks. And when we made that transition to an agency, I knew what types of questions to ask. I knew what ACOS should be. I knew what tacos should be. And I just didn't quite know how to get there. And so there's some fundamental concepts that you can listen to podcasts about, but it doesn't, at least for me, it didn't really sink in until I messed it up for a couple months. And I was like, oh no, I way overspent here. I overbid here, or this campaign shut off. It just going through that, I think, is part of like developing into a professional e-commerce entrepreneur. So, um, yeah, and,
Yep.
and I would also one last thing I want to add onto this is that self-management plus a software may be a great option. And I would say that that is kind of the intermediate step in between self, like purely self-managing and going into an agency.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and one other thing there too is, just to add on to the self-management piece is, I think you had mentioned it earlier. Um, as you're growing and scaling, PPC can turn into a full-time, especially if you have a native Amazon FBA business, it can kind of get overwhelming and turn into a full-time job. And so that is also something to like consider as you're, you know, especially if you're, if you deep dive into something, if you don't understand something, like me, if and David, if we don't understand something, we're going to like spend our time and learn it, and so it can distract you from other parts of your business as well. um, cool. So David, moving on, let's talk a little bit about agencies, pros, cons, what to think about there.
Absolutely. So if you go from self-managing to turning it over to an agency, that first week is awesome. At least that was my experience. Um, I was probably spending 10 to 15 hours a week only on PPC. And when that was taken off my plate, it felt great. And so I would say that I was very, very happy with it. And it wasn't until later in our experiences with agencies that we thought to ask, how many accounts is each manager overseeing? And this is simple math, right? If they're managing between 10 and 20 accounts, they're only going to be able to spend 2 to 4 hours on your account every week. And for some accounts, that may be plenty. That may be plenty of time. Also, they may be able to do in 2 hours what took you 10 hours. Like, you should be hiring a professional. So hopefully they're going to do a better job than you. And so, early on that didn't bother me. Where it started to bother me is when we would say, be out of stock on something and say, hey, we want to turn these campaigns off. Or, hey, we're approaching busy season. We want to make these modifications for the next couple weeks. Uh, I think they were great at getting the infrastructure set up, but in terms of like the daily or weekly tasks, they just didn't have time for it. And that is really not a criticism of our manager. It's a criticism of that business model. Is that if you have 20 accounts, there's only so much time in the day. And so anyway, and then I would say one thing that, and this has been a gripe from one of my gripes with the agencies from the get-go, is misaligned interests on how they charge you. So just to give a range, for an agency, I've paid as little as $600 per month, and I've paid as much as $1,500. And on top of that, there's always a percentage of ad spend. It may be 5% ad spend or 10% of ad spend, but it essentially incentivizes, like, your account becomes more profitable to that agency the more you spend. Now, me as a business owner, I'm not always interested in spending more. In fact, a lot of times I'm interested in spending less on the PPC side of things and putting those dollars to work elsewhere. And so that was something that, when we were interviewing agencies, I would often say, is there any way you would do a percentage of net income or tacos or some other metric that deals with profitability and not ad spend? Because not only are we misaligned, we're pointing in opposite directions in a lot of instances. And so I had this dream of having our PPC manager compensated based on some sort of profitability metric. And we weren't able to get to that with an agency, but we did move in house. And Ken, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about this big pivot that we've made in the last year,
Sure.
and how that's impacted our business.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we pivot into the in-house piece, I want to speak on the agency side a little bit. Um, which, if you're in this space for a long enough time, you'll kind of notice a trend, and it's I'm talking space Amazon FBA. And so what I've noticed was, and this was through before we made this last pivot, actually before we hired I think the second or third agency, I literally interviewed 25 agencies. I think it was a better part of a month interviewing all of these agencies. And David and I had a series of like 7 questions I asked every single agency. I interviewed the largest agencies, two of the 3 largest agencies for Amazon FBA PPC, all the way down to a kid that had 2 clients, and everybody in between, and we compiled this massive list of data. And so what I'm going to share with you is it's all from interviews and factual data. And so what we found out was, and at the high level, I always try to think of like, get in someone else's mind. And so we know, David and I know several owners of these agencies now. And so what you see is a trend: someone sells on Amazon, and then they find out that, oh shit, this is really hard. And then they're like in masterminds or other entrepreneur circles, and they're seeing other other entrepreneurs that are maturing through their journey, and they're starting service-based businesses to serve clients in the Amazon FBA space. And so this is kind of this trend you'll see. And if you take a step back and think about it, you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. You make a name for yourself. You have a YouTube channel. You do whatever. You do these promotions, have a podcast, whatever, and then you start this agency. And then an agency at the end of the day is a business. It's a sellable asset, right? And the way to scale an agency is to get more clients. And so if you think of it in that case, like this agency owner is interested in scaling their business with clients, so they have a sellable asset at the end of the day. And whether it's easier than selling on FBA, I don't know. I've never owned and scaled an agency. I don't know. Maybe it is, because there's a lot of people doing it. Maybe it's not. But if you think of it in that mindset of, hey, that's their number one goal is to get as many clients as possible, because that makes their company worth more money, right? And so that's kind of how I looked at this after we interviewed all of these businesses, and I kind of like, the picture was painted very clear to me, like, oh wow, this is kind of how this works. And so a lot of the stuff that David mentioned, the pricing and ad spend, it really was clear to us after we've dug in real deep that this is a scaling model of PPC agencies, and it didn't align with our business. And so that was the number one point where we were like, no matter what agency we interviewed, they wanted a flat fee and a percentage of ad spend. And that was pretty common across all the companies. And it was a significant fee, especially if you own multiple companies. And at the end of the day, and we could not get any of them to align their services with our profit. And we thought, like, that's a red flag. Like, who wouldn't, like, then that means you're not our partner. If your only interest is collecting a fee every month and a percentage of our ad spend, you're not concerned about our company. And so they're using other metrics to keep you on as a client, what I would call barely satisfying. So they tell their account manager, like, hey, make sure you're barely satisfying, so they come back every month. That's a joke, by the way. And so that's kind of my take on PPC agencies. And that's really where David and I decided to pivot, of like, okay, in order for us to scale properly, we need a good value for our money, and we also need a good impact to our business from the time spent on the PPC. And at that point, our businesses were fairly matured, and to where there's 2 or 3 levers to pull on PPC. There's not much more. And those levers, we've realized after operating these businesses for years, that once you get to that point, there's a couple levers to pull, and there's not many more. It's the 80-20 rule. You can spend your lifetime in PPC and trying to do little things, but you're going to make most of the impact with 20%. And so anyway, that was a long story. So pivoting into, we decided, hey, after all this research and all this experience, we're going to move to in-house PPC. And so we started our search, and we knew kind of what we wanted. We wanted someone in-house full-time and to manage all of our accounts. And we wanted that person to have 3 to 5 years experience whether preferably with an agency or somewhere else, coming directly to us, being able to add immediate value and run with everything that was kind of already going. And so we interviewed, I don't know, probably 10 people, whittled it down. We wound up finding a rock star. And so this person came in, and we kind of aligned their interest with the performance of PPC, which we wanted to do with an agency, which we could never find an agency to do that with. And so, without getting into the nitty gritty, that's kind of how we operate now, is aligning this person's interest with the performance of the company. David, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, without going way deep on this compensation model, I want to explain it just a little bit. So what we have, so this is a full-time employee, and they are paid a base hourly rate. So regardless of performance, they have a base rate. And for each brand in each marketplace, we have a taco school. And that is the one metric that we are looking at. And we have a separate taco school for each brand in each marketplace. If they hit that, there's an opportunity to increase their hourly rate. So we're doing this 1 month in arrears, but there's an opportunity to increase their pay by a factor of about 40 to 50%. So I mean, if we're hitting those tacos numbers, it's profitable to the company. And so after asking all 25 of those agencies, hey, can we change your structure of billing, and getting told no, we were going to put this into play as we brought it in-house. And I would say so far, so good. I think anytime you can align interests, that's a good thing. And, obviously if our PPC manager is doing an awesome job and hitting those monthly targets, we want to reward that. And the opposite is true. If they're not, we don't want to be paying a flat fee for subpar work. So that's a little bit of how we have that set up. Now, another advantage of this is we have a listing optimization team and we have PPC. And up until very recently, these operated separately. And it shouldn't be that way because they're both dealing with keywords. And so what we've done by bringing this resource in-house is we have them sync up with the listing optimization team. And when we're updating listings or modifying titles or doing split testing, we are looking at what keywords are performing really well on the PPC side of things, and we're folding that into our decisions on the listing optimization side of things. And that was something that didn't exist before we did that. So, anyway, Ken, anything else you want to comment on as we talk about moving this in-house?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple more things that come to mind. One, don't ever be afraid to pivot in your business. I think pivoting, you learn a lot. Whether it could be a good pivot, it could be a bad pivot, but making changes and always being open to ideas and pivoting is, I think it's a crucial piece of business. And so don't be afraid to do that. It's a tough decision, but list out pros and cons, go with your gut and stand behind that. And the other piece is, I think what we did really, really well, and the last agency that we used, super talented agencies, have great account managers, and they're very, they worked with us. So when we exited, we worked with our PPC manager, David and I, and our PPC manager. We came up with a really solid implementation plan, because PPC is kind of, if you've got a native Amazon FBA business, PPC is kind of at the core of your business. And so you don't want any drastic anybody that knows a lot about PPC, you don't want drastic changes. You want very gradual, small changes. And so we had a solid implementation plan that covered like a 90-day window. And we worked methodically to do that. And so I was gonna say, if you plan on doing, if you're with an agency now and you want to go in-house, or if you're in-house, you want to go with an agency, I would just say, make sure you have some kind of an implementation plan. So there's no just drastic swings. you'll be rewarded on the other side of this if you spend some time planning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this sums up Ken and I's experiences with PPC over the last 5 or 6 years. And we certainly have made a lot of pivots. And hopefully, as we share our story about the moves that we made, you are able to take some of this information and make a decision that is best for your business. If you have any questions about this episode or want to discuss this more, go to FiringTheMan.com and hit the microphone. And I'd love to hear from the audience. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.